Nocturnal recaps here. Today I'm going to tell you about a war drama based on true events called Hacksaw Ridge. A pacifist becomes a war hero, despite almost being kicked out of the army for refusing to take up arms.
How am I supposed to maintain discipline with a man like that in my unit?
Japan, 1945. Desmond Doss, the main character of the movie, is wounded. Other soldiers carry him on a stretcher, wading through explosions and flying bullets. The events of the movie move back 16 years. Young Desmond races his brother Harold to climb to the top of a mountain to enjoy the view. Meanwhile, their father Tom Doss, a veteran of the Great War, stands in the cemetery and remembers his fellow soldiers. The war changed Tom a lot. He paid much more attention to the liquor bottle than to his sons, leaving them to be raised by their mother. One day, Desmond and Harold were fighting in the yard, and their father was just watching. Desmond grabbed a brick and hit his brother hard on the head with it. Harold falls unconscious and is carried away by his parents to give him first aid. For several minutes, a dazed Desmond stared at his brother, not knowing if he would survive or not. His attention is drawn to a religious engraving depicting Cain and Abel at the moment of fratricide. The worst did not happen. His brother soon woke up, but this event left its mark on Desmond's psyche. Years later, Desmond has become a deeply religious man. He helps out at church, fasts, and keeps all the commandments. One day, Desmond witnesses a traffic accident in which a man injures an artery in his leg. Desmond stops the bleeding by pulling the injured man's leg with a belt, then takes the man to the hospital. There he meets a nurse named Dorothy Shoulda and falls in love with her at first sight. Desmond donates his blood to ask a girl out, and she says yes. In the cinema, Desmond asks Dorothy questions about medicine, and the girl promises to give him her old textbook so that he could find the answers to his questions himself. Upon arriving home, Desmond learns that his brother has joined the army as World War II is in full swing, and he doesn't want to be left behind. Tom tries to dissuade his son as he remembers what war is like, but Harold remains firm in his decision. Inspired by his brother's act, Desmond takes up the study of medicine in order to go to the front as a medic. When he confesses this to Dorothy, the girl at first tries to dissuade the guy, but afterwards asks Desmond to propose to her and promises to marry him during his first leave of absence. Tom takes his son to the cemetery. He tells Desmond that with his worldview, it will be incredibly difficult for him in the military. But Desmond has already made up his mind. Upon leaving for the military unit, Dorothy gives Desmond a Bible with her picture inside. Desmond arrives at the training camp and gets to know the other soldiers. The atmosphere among the recruits is cheerful. They joke a lot and play dumb games. Soon, Sergeant Havel arrives at the barracks and gives the recruits a full metal jacket-style roasting.
Let me see your Indian war cry, son! I don't...
The sergeant instructs the recruits to assemble outside, teaches them knot-tying techniques, and then leads them through an obstacle course. Desmond even takes the lead, and Private Smitty throws him to the ground with a kick, but Desmond still manages to overtake Smitty at the finish line. It's time for rifle training, but Desmond refuses to take up arms for religious reasons.
Well, I'm sorry, Sergeant. I can't touch a gun.
The sergeant takes him to Captain Glover, where Desmond explains that he was counting on corpsman duties. The captain doesn't want to hear anything about the guy's pacifism and decides to send him to a psychiatrist to have him demobilized. Meanwhile, Sergeant Havel tells all of his fellow soldiers about Desmond's beliefs so they don't rely on him in battle. In the evening, Private Smitty decides to provoke Desmond by taking Dorothy's picture from him, but the guy refuses to fight. After talking to Desmond, the psychiatrist informs Glover that he is far from crazy and he can't send the guy back to civilian life. Glover and Havel decide to make the guy's service a living hell. Desmond is assigned to the most disgusting job. Also, the sergeant makes the whole squad suffer because of Desmond's beliefs, and they beat the guy up in the night. In the morning, Sergeant Havel arrives at the barracks and, noticing the bed covered with blood, asks him to leave the army voluntarily, but Desmond is adamant.
I got extra guard duty, so can't.
The sergeant wants to know the names of those who beat him up, but Desmond replies that he just fell out of bed. At the end of their training, it's time for leave, for which Desmond has planned a wedding. But the colonel does not want to let him go because he has not passed the firing course. The colonel orders Desmond to pick up a rifle and show his skills, but he refuses.
I'm not asking you, Private!
At this time, Dorothy is waiting for Desmond at the church, but he does not show up, as he is sitting in the guardhouse for violating a direct order. Captain Glover convinces the lad to plead guilty at the tribunal and leave voluntarily. He invites Dorothy to the cell, but even she fails to change Desmond's mind. Tom puts on his World War I uniform and goes to see his old commanding officer. Meanwhile, Desmond's trial is underway, and he is about to be dishonorably discharged from the army for violating orders. But Tom saves the situation by breaking into the room. He brings a letter from the general, which states that the soldier is at liberty to refuse weapons if he performs the duties of a corpsman.
You are free to run into the hellfire of battle without a single weapon to protect yourself.
The action shifts to Okinawa. Yesterday's recruits immediately realize what war is, passing by a whole convoy of truck full of corpses. Desmond's squad occupies one of the surviving houses, and soon they are joined by the remnants of the previous squad, including 2 medics. They tell Desmond to remove his Red Cross armband, as medics are a priority target for the Japanese. Soon the soldiers are sent to assault the high ground. The ship's artillery begins shelling the Japanese positions, after which the soldiers climb the netting on the steep slope. Making their way through the thick smoke, the soldiers walk past the many corpses left from the previous 6 unsuccessful assault attempts. The Japanese attacked suddenly and killed many soldiers at once. Recovering a little from the shock, Desmond begins pulling wounded fighters from the battlefield. The battle is hard fought, but the Americans still manage to advance towards the enemy. In the heat of battle, Private Smitty doesn't notice the Japanese sneaking up on him with a knife. Desmond saves Smitty by jumping on the enemy, though it was Smitty who had to finish him off. The fight transitions smoothly into the Japanese trenches, and the squad approaches its objective, the Japanese bunkers. Smitty gets close to the bunker and throws a C4 into it. After losing machine gun cover, the Japanese are forced to retreat under the American onslaught. The battle is won, and Captain Glover orders the perimeter positions. Desmond and Smitty spend the night in the same crater. As they talk, Desmond tells him why he made a vow not to take up arms. One day his father got very drunk and tried to kill his mother. Desmond took the revolver from his father and almost shot him. Shocked at what he almost did, he took his oath. In the morning, the Japanese again rushed to attack through the underground tunnels. Having a numerical advantage, they rush forward, sweeping away everything in their path. Captain Glover calls down artillery fire on their positions and orders his soldiers to retreat. Smitty and Sergeant Havel gets wounded in this fight. Desmond tries to save Smitty, but it's too late. The guy is dead. Desmond freezes on the edge of a cliff and asks God what he wants him to do, and receives in reply the cries of the wounded from the battlefield.
All right.
He carries the wounded to the edge and brings them down, wrapped in a funny knot, from which the sergeant scoffs. Captain Glover orders the artillery fire to cease, worried about the wounded remaining on the battlefield. The Japanese immediately take advantage of this, climbing out of their tunnels and killing the wounded. Desmond is making his way to another wounded man when he is spotted by the Japanese and draws fire. Desmond is forced down into one of the tunnels. Here, he makes his way through a complex maze of passages, hiding from the enemy.
Morphine. It's good.
As night falls, Desmond continues to bring down the wounded. His hands are badly chafed by the rope, but he continues to save lives. In the morning, Glover is surprised that someone has been bringing down the wounded all night.
Some nuts up there dragging wounded from the top. Even lowered a couple of Japs.
He gathers a small squad to go to his aid. Desmond finds Sergeant Havel, and at the same moment, they are overtaken by a group of Japanese. Desmond breaks his vow by picking up a rifle, not to take a life, but to save one. He makes an improvised stretcher out of the rifle and a piece of cloth and carries the sergeant away under enemy fire. He lowers the sergeant and jumps after him. The Japanese try to shoot Desmond, but Captain Glover and his soldiers rescue him.
Let's get this soldier to a hospital then, right now.
After a short rest, it's time for another assault. Captain Groves apologizes to Desmond and asks him to go with them, as the other soldiers do not want to go into battle without him. The soldiers stand before the high ground. Despite receiving the order to begin the attack, they patiently wait for Desmond to pray for them. In the final scene of the movie, the soldiers once again go on the assault, this time much more successful than the previous ones. Realizing that the battle is lost, the Japanese commanders prepare for seppuku, while the ordinary soldiers surrender. But it is a trick. They throw grenades at the Americans, 2 of which Desmond successfully repels, but he is badly wounded by the explosion. The other soldiers carry him away from the battlefield and bring him down, just as Desmond had done earlier for them. Desmond Doss not only survived but still lived to the age of 87. He became the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor.